I really think that the Liberal government want these tariffs to come in. I think that they want to, there's an old adage, it's, don't let a good crisis go to waste.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Radical Center for a very exciting episode about what's going on in Canadian politics this week. There's lots going on in Canadian politics this week. We have a provincial election underway, and there's a federal leadership race for the Liberal Party to replace Justin Trudeau. And whoever wins that, guess what they're going to do? It's a big prize. They get to be the Prime Minister on day one, which is pretty special because most party leaders don't get to do that. It's not usually very long-lived. It's usually short-lived if that happens, because Canadians don't seem to like that very much. But will Mr. Carney change the game? I'm very optimistic about him. I'm going to get into that a little bit, but we'll see. I feel like he's growing on me. Get started with provincial politics, because I think people are just, I don't think anyone knows there's an election going on. What do you think?
Well, it's been something that we've talked about. I mean, since we started the podcast, we know that this election has been coming, and I think Doug Ford, he did the smart thing politically, and he took the walk down to the Lieutenant Governor's office and said, let's dissolve Parliament and go into an election.
Yeah, he did. It's week one of the campaign. There's, 4 more weeks? There are 4 full weeks until February 27th. Don't hold me to that. I didn't count the days, but something around 4 weeks.
28 days in total.
Yes.
Of campaigning.
But there's
what happened?
2 days already, 3 days.
That's right. So technically he went Tuesday, Wednesday. Oh, now I don't even know. Okay, he went Tuesday or Wednesday, and then it's the day after that the election officially starts.
Yeah.
So
they launched their campaigns. Let's talk a little bit about what we think of their launches. His launch was obviously probably the strongest. He's in government. He's got a majority government. It's easy to pull off a very big, strong launch when you are the current premier and you have a lot of people around you to help you organize that kind of thing. What do we think of the NDP launch and the Liberal launch? What stood out to you from, I guess, all three of them?
We'll start off with Doug Ford. I mean, obviously, he's the incumbent. The backdrop of the U.S. border and the flags in the background with the workers, that was very powerful. And, their slogan is going to be Protect Ontario. I thought Merritt Stiles' launch in Toronto was actually very good. And I kind of learned something about her. I didn't know that she was actually born in St. John's, where I was born 3 hours from her in Gander. So that's kind of interesting. I didn't know that. Their slogan is on your side. And I think they're going to focus a lot on healthcare and housing affordability. Bonnie Crombie, I don't really know how to put it. It was kind of a flop. I think that Merritt Stiles, I think that she hit it out of the park. And Bonnie Crombie, like she's literally in a parking lot she tried to pull off the hat thing with a hat that didn't really, I don't even remember what it said. That's how much it stuck on me.
Yeah.
But their party slogan is more for you. It's going to be interesting to see how this works out because, more than likely the outcome is going to be that Doug Ford is still going to have a majority government. It's more of a fight for second place. And that's going to be interesting to watch over the next 20-something days.
For sure. I agree with you just on the Liberal launch. You don't pull a stunt with a hat during a launch. That's not the time and place, right? You should pull the stunt with the hat. I love the hat. Obviously, I've talked a lot.
But they should have done it. They should have done it first, which was my point in the last episode.
Yeah.
Is the Canada Not for Sale hat. That should have been their idea.
A launch is to get your team all excited. It's to get the candidates all excited. It's to draw volunteers. You want to have a big thing. A launch is a big event. You don't show up in the middle of a parking lot with one friend and 2 hats. Like, that's not a launch. So I would say her real launch was the launch of her own campaign in her new riding, which is Cooksville, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. I heard, I wasn't there, but from my understanding is there wasn't a lot of people there, which is surprising for somebody who was the mayor of Mississauga, a seat in Mississauga, and not have, like, the place should be packed. Her leadership launch, I was there at that. It was packed, right? And that's how it should be. That's how this should have been. It's very surprising. The former mayor of Mississauga, who wants to be, should be able to fill a room for a launch. It's that simple, right? It doesn't have to take 3 weeks for that to happen. It should happen relatively quickly and very naturally. Let's talk a little bit about best and worst case scenarios for each party. I've been tweeting about that. What do you think is the best case scenario for Doug Ford? Let's start with the PC party. He is the incumbent. He called this election. What do you think is the best case scenario for him?
So I think we pretty much have the same view. Your tweets and my thoughts, they kind of line up. Best case scenario is they win over 100 seats
Mm-hmm.
and they get, mid, maybe even push to that 50% of the popular vote share.
Mm-hmm.
That would just be decimating for both parties. That would be a strong mandate. That's the best case. The worst case, which is I think the least likely of options, is that they barely hang on to their majority, which I mean, they'd have to lose. They're at 80 something seats now. They would have to get closer to the 60s to have their worst case scenario. The middle case, sort of where I'm sitting at right now during the campaign, it could change, is somewhere between what they have now and just below 100 seats. That would be the middle outcome for me, I think.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And just, on the polling, there is a poll that was released today. I think it was by, oh, I can't remember who it was by, but the PCs are at 50 points, the Liberals are at 24, and the Green at 20, which is, it's an Ipsos poll, sorry. Um,
That's okay.
and that's the largest lead recorded since the turn of the century, which is a pretty big deal. I don't think we've ever seen a party polling in the fees going into an election. It would take a lot for his luck to change the government. It would take a lot, and I can't even imagine what that would be. So I completely agree with your assessment. I think personally the most likely scenario is going to be closer to that 100 seats, decimating the opposition. I think people are just not happy with the Liberals and the NDP, happy with them provincially. They seem to find with progressive conservatives who aren't necessarily going to spend too much time focusing on social conservative stuff, but they are there to solve everyday problems. People want their problems to be solved. They don't want ideological stuff. They don't want anybody governing because, they have strong personal beliefs in this or that. They want, I have a problem and I want it to be solved. And usually those problems tend to be more on the economic side. So these are the things that I think have made Doug Ford so extremely successful. Let's talk a little bit about, let's leave the Liberals for last. Let's talk about the NDP.
Well, yeah, so best case scenario is they're the official opposition. And again, they push away the Liberals from taking those seats where traditionally the NDP and the Liberals get into a fight. That's the best case. The worst case is that they get decimated, they lose a lot of seats. The PCs pick up seats, the Liberals pick up seats, and they're just taking losses from every single direction. Middle case scenario, I don't really know what it is. I think it's just kind of survive the campaign. I think that would be the middle ground for them. Yeah, and like I said, I got to give Merritt Stiles props. I listened to her campaign launch and I thought it was really good. I thought, her supporters in the background, they were very energetic and, I don't agree with everything that she says, but if that carries throughout the campaign, I think she has a very strong possibility of staying as the opposition leader.
I've met her several times. I actually like her quite a bit. I think she's made some mistakes along the way. specifically, with Sarah Jama and how that unfolded. I saw a poll today that says Sarah may actually win that seat in Hamilton, which is
Yeah, it's going to be a crazy race.
yeah,
That's like a 3 or 4 way race.
yeah, and that's really bad for a leader of the NDP to have put herself in that position, because it was entirely unnecessary, and Sarah's been practically begging them to take her back, and now she might win the seat and it's not their seat, and it's not for them. But overall, I think Marit has a great head on her shoulders. She's extremely smart, and she knows, and she's very polished. Her issue is the party is so ideological that it's so hard to move it. It's a little bit different. The leader of the NDP, their relationship with the party is significantly different than the leader of the Conservatives or the leader of the Liberals, right? It's a little bit different. You don't have as much, I guess, ultimate power, because the NDP, they're more grassroots, there's more unions involved, there's more, internal stakeholders that actually have a lot of say within the party than there are necessarily in the Liberals and the Conservatives, where the Liberals tend to be extremely leader centric. Basically, the leader is everything in the Liberal Party. And if the leader wants to be a centrist, the entire party has to be a centrist and a centrist party. And if the leader wants to be left leaning, then the entire party has to be left leaning. If the leader wants a carbon tax, everybody must love the carbon tax. If the leader decides he hates the carbon tax, we all must hate the carbon tax. That is the Liberal Party, right? And
Yeah.
I wish there was different. I beg people to change, but it is very leader centric. And but I agree with your assessment on the NDP. It's very hard to see a scenario for them where they do better than what they're doing right now. Basically, they either lose more or they stay where they are. Let's talk about the Liberal Party, the Ontario Liberal Party. Bonnie Crombie, not off to a very good start. Tough time, man. Like they don't have enough candidates. What do you think is the best case scenario for the Ontario Liberal Party?
There's very few options, to be honest with you. Their very best case, which I think is at least likely, is that they would become opposition, and that would be very highly unlikely. The middle case, which is I think that they need to do, is they need to get their party status back. And then the worst case scenario is that they don't do any better than they already are doing now. And, her campaign is not off to a good start. The hat was a flop. It was something about healthcare. I don't even remember the slogan. That's how memorable
It was too
it was,
long. You don't write.
right?
It was
And is
longer than Canada is not for sale. Like it was
yeah,
a
yeah,
very long made up slogan that's hard to remember. I don't remember it either.
right. And
Yeah.
she came like right out of the gate. I understand the enthusiasm, but she came out of the gate yelling into the microphone, Doug Ford doesn't care about you. And a lot of it was very like it was overhyped. Like she put way too much emotion into it. My advice is to stop appointing candidates outside of Toronto. Their best path back to being a party that's meaningful is fighting in downtown Toronto and some of the surrounding areas with the NDP. If they dump all of their money, all of their time, and all their resources into getting her seat in Mississauga and into downtown Toronto, then they have a real shot for the next election. Because what's going to happen in the next election is people are going to get sick and tired of Doug Ford. People are going to get tired of him, and they're going to want to change. And if Bonnie Crombie really wants to be the premier and really wants to take the party back to the center, like they need to do at the federal level, you have to have a voice at Queen's Park in order to do that.
Mhm. I don't disagree with that. I do think she should have ran in Toronto, though. I don't think she should have ran in Mississauga. We'll see, though. We'll see. But I think she should have ran in Toronto in one of those seats that she wants back from the NDP. But I don't disagree with anything you said. I think that's a great strategy. I will disagree with one part. I think people will get tired of Ford eventually. Um, but I think it'll be Premier Lecce or Premier McNaughton that will take over, probably midway before an election, just like we saw with Trudeau and Carney. So I think the Liberal Party will continue to struggle, not just because of the leader, but because the brand has been so heavily tarnished by Kathleen Wynne and by Justin Trudeau. Kathleen Wynne destroyed the brand of the Ontario Liberal Party provincially. We're going to talk about the tax federally. I guess this is a good segue to get into federal politics. Like, are you for the carbon tax or against the carbon tax? You made Canadians, not you, Cody.
We know where I stand.
They made Canadians live through all these years of carbon tax, and you had a guy screaming axe the tax every time you breathe in and out. And all of a sudden, every leadership candidate's coming out saying, I'm going to cancel the carbon tax as soon as I get in there. I agree with that. I think that's a great move, because for many different reasons. One, it's not working. And I'm so happy that Carney finally said it's not working. Because if there's anyone who can say that, it's him. But it takes away Pierre's biggest weapon, which is axe the tax, right? You can't axe the tax if there's no tax to axe. So what are you going to do? You're going to have to change your whole slogan, your whole campaign, and people are going to have to.
I have a shirt in my closet
That says
and it says axe the tax, right? So
I borrowed that from you.
yeah.
I've hated the carbon tax the whole time. I have literally been tweeting against the carbon tax for years, right? And how it makes no sense. And I don't know if you ever read my window rebate story, and I'm so upset about this. But anyway, basically, I got my windows replaced last year. And the guy tells me, I'm sitting there with the guy, the window guy, and he says to me that there used to be a federal rebate, but they canceled it. And I was like, what? Why would you cancel a window rebate for people to. My house was built in 1975. My windows are old. Like, so why would you not have a rebate for people to replace their windows? Isn't this what this whole climate change thing is about? But the carbon tax is what they focused on, right? So back to what I was saying with the Liberal Party, people, the average person, doesn't know where they stand on any issues. Where is Carney on the Middle East? I wrote an op-ed with a good friend earlier this week. It was published. But there's no information on where these people stand on anything. But it's going to be a difficult road. However, we are seeing a little bit of a polling bounce. What's that about? What do you make?
So yes, there is, like, well, I said last two episodes, I think that realistically with Trudeau gone, there would be a small polling bounce for the Liberals. And I mean, it makes sense. I mean, they got rid of the person who has completely destroyed their brand. So there is going to be a bit of a polling bounce for the Liberals. So that's happening. That's panning out. We don't know how big it is. I don't know if it's enough to drag the Conservatives down. I think, Pierre, like you said before, that Pierre Poilievre has probably reached his peak, and now that Trudeau is gone, it's gonna come back down to a more normal level, right? Which was mid-40s. When it comes to the carbon tax, this is all Pierre has been talking about. Because when it comes to the carbon tax, it gets passed on to the consumer, right? The farmer that grows it, the trucker that brings it, the grocery store that sells it, and then eventually it gets back to you. So it's a tax on top of a tax on top of a tax on top of a tax, right? That's just the way it works. What is yet to be seen is if Mark Carney can convince the public that he's telling the truth, right? He has to be able to tell people that we got this wrong, we screwed it up, and we're reversing it. But is it going to be too late? Because right now, outside of an election, you have a pretty much unlimited amount that you can spend on ads. And my gut feeling is the longer that they spend not going into an election, the more the Conservatives are going to be able to spend on saying to people, this carbon tax has been in for 10 years. And all the leadership candidates, in some way or another, have had their hand in making this policy. So that's yet to be seen, right? When it comes to the polling bounce, it's kind of everything comes back to normal, because this is kind of where the conservatives were before everything blew up in the liberals' faces when it came to Chrystia Freeland, right? So this is kind of where it's at. But now I think that moving forward, the conservatives do have to be careful, because there's going to be a new face to the Liberal Party. And Pierre Poilievre, like you said, he does a lot of things that are, ideological, right? And to a segment of his supporters, that matters. But you're going to get to a point, whether that's, the spring or in October, where you have to say that you're going to be the prime minister for everybody, and you have to present a plan. But my thinking is, and I don't know this to be true, I'm not that well connected, but my thinking is that they're a little bit too cocky, and where they think that they could take these risks and they can go off on these tangents about issues that only matter to the base. And like, Pierre is so close. Like, he's so close. And, if he trips, then he could trip so hard that he could lose it all.
I completely agree with that. And I honestly see him tripping. I honestly can see a path to victory for Mark Carney. I completely agree with everything you're saying, because the polls have been so big in his favor, but they're not really big in his favor. They're big against Trudeau. They don't know Carney. They may hate him, they may not hate him, but they don't know him. And they might get to know him, and he might grow on them. But what's going on with Chrystia Freeland?
So she did an odd thing this week, and she said she would basically, the cabinet that Trudeau has now, that she's been a part of, and she had the biggest office out of the entire cabinet for the entire time that she was finance minister. And now she's saying she's going to cut the cabinet in half and get rid of all those unnecessary positions. Like, you're basically walking around with a picture saying, please shoot me right here. How are you going to convince the public that you're going to be different when you were literally second in command?
Yeah, and that's a fair question. Like, how, what's with the change of heart overnight when he decided to fire you, right? Like, why were you okay with everything he did for 10 years, and all of a sudden you've decided to change your mind? Makes no sense to me.
Because she was going to get fired. That's why.
Yeah. So when you're about to get fired, that's when all of a sudden your principles and come into play. But for 10 years you helped steer a ship where you didn't, even though you didn't agree in the direction that it was going. I don't know, it's hard for me to believe.
And Karina Gold is the same way. Like, she was the government house leader. Like, you're the legislative chauffeur, right? It's your job to basically make sure that people vote the way that they're supposed to. And she made this weird argument that she wasn't able to stand up against all of the bad decisions because it's a democracy, but now I'm free, right? And that doesn't really make any sense
They all
either.
basically are calling him a cult leader, basically. Half of the former finance minister who, and I saw this, I was shocked. The former finance minister who's a deputy leader, or a deputy prime minister, go on CP24, sit with the CP24 news anchor and say, this leadership race is liberating, and now I'm free. What got in there? It actually upsets me when I hear that from Gould and from Freeland. You guys have been there for 10 years, and now you're going to show up because you're running in a leadership to say, oh, we disagree with everything that he did. Why didn't you say that for 10 years? Why didn't you fight a little bit harder? Right? There was no dissent, at least nothing that was seen publicly. It was only, Jody and she was gone, and then Selena, and she was gone. But there was no there was no disagreements. There was no a very clear you know about issues.
The last leadership candidate we should talk about, which is pretty interesting, is Ruby Dalla. So she's getting a lot of attention on social media. What are your opinions on that?
I find her candidacy interesting. So a couple of things. So there's now a total of 400,000 registered liberals. That wasn't the case when this race started just a few weeks ago, right? It's basically, I think it was just under 100,000. It's interesting because I don't know what's going on. I'm a little bit worried about maybe anti-Trudeau people signing up for this race for maybe the purpose of voting for hell in winning the election, or whatever it is, right? There was also some questions about why Chandra Arya was disqualified from the race. So I don't really know what's going on with the spike in registrations. It's certainly, I'd love to think that people are so excited to bring the Liberal Party back. I don't want to make any assumptions, but I'm a little bit concerned on that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I was surprised at the 400,000 number. That that's a really big number.
Yeah. Especially for where they are right now. Like, this is not a party that's on the verge of, like, when you have like an exciting new leader and the party's not in government and there's like energy and excitement around that, that's one thing. But this is a party that's like on its, you know, last legs. This is not a party that's exciting the average Canadian to go and sign up for a leadership race. So I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, I would say too, when it comes to Chandra Arya, that right, getting disqualified and not really knowing why or what, or basically we're left to make assumptions. I understand that feeling of being disenfranchised because, as I've said many times on this podcast before, I knew that my vote wasn't going to count for Patrick Brown in the Conservative leadership race,
Mm-hmm.
but I said, screw it. I said, they pissed me off and it's not going to count, but I'm still going to tick his name, put it in the mail, and I'm going to make them open that ballot and waste their time. But not everybody thinks like me. So, but it'd be interesting to see how the race turns out. I mean, Mark Carney's the front runner, probably going to win, probably going to be the next prime minister. Should we move on? The extra topic that we had on here is kind of interesting and nobody could really figure out what it means, but Jagmeet Singh is leaving the door open to, well, first he said he was leaving the door open to support the government, and then he kind of realized that he stepped into it. So today he clarified and he said, we want Parliament to be brought back to pass relief for what might be tariffs that are coming. But no, we're still not going to prop up the government, and we still want to go to an election. So what the hell is Jagmeet thinking?
Nobody knows. Nobody knows what he's thinking. Jagmeet doesn't know what he's thinking. Nobody knows. I will tell you what I think he should do. He should support the government. You have a new leader. He's not doing well in the polls, right? Jagmeet is not going to do well by going into an election earlier. So he needs to prop up Mark Carney. He needs to give him time. Remember, the longer Carney has in government, the better for Carney, because then Trudeau becomes a distant memory, and then he gets rid of the carbon tax, for example. He gets rid of the carbon tax. Then there's no more tax to axe, and then Pierre's going to have to find a new slogan. I think his best course of action is to actually give Carney a chance to govern and give him as long as he can in government, because as Carney's numbers get better, his might, and you might start seeing Pierre kind of becoming a little bit less popular. I don't think that the NDP will surpass the Conservatives anytime soon, but I think you becomes more and more popular among voters, and Pierre starts to get annoying as he can be, and then people aren't so mad at Jagmeet for keeping the government in for as long as he did, because the government's not unpopular anymore. That's the best course of action for Jagmeet.
Yeah, I agree with everything that you just said. I think the best time for them was in the fall when, the Liberals were down, they were way down, and they were jockeying for second and third place. Now that Trudeau's gone, that polling bounce that we mentioned, one of the people that lost the most was the NDP, because Liberals who wanted to park their vote with the NDP because they didn't like Trudeau, now they're coming home to the Liberals because, again, they're curious. They want to see who the Liberal leader is going to be. The NDP membership, based on the polls that we've seen, I think it was either end of last year or beginning of this year, is that even the NDP, the grassroots, they don't want an election. When it comes to Mark Carney, there's pros and cons to either governing until October or going right into an election. The cons of dragging it out, I think, is having, if the Conservatives continue to be popular, it's the unlimited amount of money that they can spend on their messaging. So they have a longer time to define Mark Carney. If I were Mark Carney, though, and I gotta say, like, this is my gut feeling, I really think that the Liberal government want these tariffs to come in. I think that they want to, there's an old adage, it's, don't let a good crisis go to waste, right? And I think that they might want to use this crisis to put stimulus into the economy, because when you put stimulus into the economy or when you send checks out to people, it causes inflation. And then eventually people can't afford their mortgages and they lose their homes and their cars and all the assets that they have. And Mark Carney, he's the former governor of the Bank of Canada, the Bank of England. So he could be the guy that will come in and save us from the big, mean orange giant in the South.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be their pathway to take out the Conservatives.
I agree. I'm telling you, I see it. I see I see a possible Mark Carney Liberal government in the fall of 2025. And I see the Conservatives kicking themselves for, going a little too right on ideology and not recognizing that Canadians don't like that. They just didn't like the other guy. And you just happened to be at the right place at the right time, and then you screwed it up. It's that simple. This was great, Cody, as always. One of our longer episodes, but it was such a great
Yeah.
conversation that
Be shorter once I edit it all. Don't worry.
I know. Well, no, I enjoyed it. I hope our listeners enjoy it too. We will be back next week with more. We hope you subscribe. We hope you like and share. Tell your friends about these two great minds, or not so great minds, whatever you want to say. But yeah, tell your friends about what we're doing here. And we hope that you join us again very soon. And we'll see you again next week.